समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Surprise of surprises, or maybe not such a surprise, given the fact that geopolitics has now become like a T20 game with odds and scores changing all the time with every ball. It is in that fast changing situation that Afghanistan's Taliban foreign minister or foreign minister of the Taliban government, Amir Khan Muttaqi, arrived in Delhi. He arrived in Delhi in a timing almost perfectly synchronized, obviously not by him. Looks like the Pakistanis got irritated. Nevertheless, almost perfectly synchronized by a series of Pakistani aerial bombings inside Afghanistan, where the Pakistanis claim, or the Pakistani sources claim, that they were targeting Noor Wali Masood, who is the top leader of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They said they were targeting a vehicle he was riding. This came shortly after at least 11 Pakistani soldiers were killed in a raid by TTP or Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So these fireworks were going on just as Amir Khan Muttaqi arrived in India. This was India's first formal physical contact with the Taliban government. Before this, India's foreign secretary has visited Kabul, and also Jaishankar, our foreign minister, spoke with Mutaki, his Taliban counterpart. I'm still not saying Afghan counterpart, because this government in Afghanistan, Taliban government, still doesn't have India's recognition. So I would say Taliban foreign minister and Jaishankar had a conversation just after Operation Sindoor. The Taliban government had condemned without any qualification the Pahalgam killing. So that's a little bit of a backdrop. Mutaki arrives. Pakistanis carry out bombings in Afghanistan. Some of these a little bit deep in Afghanistan. Pakistani defense minister, such as he is, he makes a fool of himself almost every time he goes for an international interview to international press. You can see him talking in his parliament, saying that yes, we will go after our terrorists in Afghan territory, and sometimes when we carry out these operations or bombings or strikes in Afghan territory, there might be collateral damage as well. That I thought is really, really cheeky, because every country says we carried out attacks in such a precise way that there was no collateral damage. That's what India also says about Op Sindoor, that the targets they attacked, the terror targets, did not involve any collateral damage. So precise were the attacks. But the Pakistanis, in fact, are saying that there might be collateral damage. It's in that environment that Muttaqi is hosted in Delhi. Not just that, he's also in Deoband, because the Taliban follow the Deobandi school of Islam. That is where the religious doctrine comes from. So the fact that Mutaki is doing a congregation in Deoband and also speaking there for a long time, these are really important turning points in the geopolitics around our region and around our country. That said, let me also tell you, today's journalism, you have to learn many more things and many more diverse things than you had in the past. In the past was politics, a little bit of political economy, a little bit of India's foreign policy vis-a-vis America, China, Pakistan, Russia, Soviet Union before that, etc. But now geopolitics has become a very large part of journalistic syllabus. It's also something that non-journalists who want to develop expertise, or who are curious, or who think that learning these skills will also enhance them in their own professions, they need. That's why the Print School of Journalism, which you keep hearing about often from me and also on our platforms, which is now completing its fourth batch. The Print School of Journalism gives you a 16 weekend journalism course, at the end of which you get a certificate, and it has editors, accomplished editors from the print newsroom, many of whom you know. I will not call myself accomplished, but I also do at least 2 classes there, and lots of experts, particularly now geopolitical experts. So we have Dr. Swasti Rao, who's our resident consulting editor for international and strategic affairs. There are more people, experts, who we will bring in. So once again, if you are curious about any of these areas, you want to become a journalist, you want to use journalistic skills to enhance whatever you might be doing. You might be a doctor, you might be a scientist, you might be a chartered accountant, a lawyer, in any profession. Journalistic skills are always useful. If so, please enroll for the 5th batch of the Print School of Journalism, which is about to close admissions very soon. So please look at the details on your screen as I'm talking. There will also be links with the description of this video. Go there and enroll. There is just a few seats left and a few days left. That said, I come back to my Amir Khan Muttaqi. So who's Amir Khan Muttaqi? See his picture. Amir Khan Muttaqi is just 54 years old. 26th of February 1971, he was born in Helmand. He was 9 when the Soviet invasion took place and the Mujahideen's jihad started. The American power came in. Americans did not physically come in, but they came in to support the Mujahideen's jihad. The Pakistanis, the Saudis, the Chinese, everybody came in, and Afghanistan was on fire. So he was among the millions who left Afghanistan and took refuge in the camps in Pakistan. So up to class 9, he had gone to a madrasa. Then he continued whatever schooling he could get in a refugee camp in Pakistan. However, by 1995, he was just 24. By this time, the Taliban had occupied Kandahar. As the Taliban occupied Kandahar, they had already seen Mutaki as a talented young fellow. So they made him director of the Kandahar radio station. So he became the director or the head of Kandahar radio just at the age of 25. The next year, Taliban took over Kabul as well. As you would know, Taliban took over Kabul twice. In 1996, then later they were evicted by the Americans post 9/11 and at the end of 2001. And then they came back in 2021 when the Americans retreated and Ghani's armies, the elected government's armies, refused to fight the Taliban. So they took then Kabul almost bloodlessly. So they were out of power for almost 20 years. It's quite a remarkable story of resilience, and through this period, Muttaqi also stayed with the Taliban. What did he do meanwhile? When the first Taliban government came in 1996 in Kabul, he continued getting promotions. By 2000, he was minister in charge of information and culture and education as well. Then 2001, as the Americans came in, he went underground. But once again, he appeared, and this time with total immunity. That's because this was in 2019-2020 when the Americans and the Taliban started negotiations in Doha. And then the Taliban could strut around as equals there, almost with diplomatic immunity. So he was in the negotiating team with the Americans in 2019-20. With the fall of the Ghani government, as Taliban took over again in 2021, he became the foreign minister. Now, he may be the foreign minister of the Taliban government, but we can't forget who the Taliban are and what they stand for. And we saw a little highlight of that today at Muttaqi's press conference, where women journalists were not allowed. In fact, no journalist was allowed, and that has led to a sense of outrage. At the same time, that has led to a sense of outrage. It is true, however, that Muttaqi himself, in a way, is party to the Taliban law of not allowing women to be educated beyond class 6, then total parda, etc., etc., etc. So this is not a normal regime, but the fact is that they are in charge of a country that's really material to India. Now, since I told you that he became in the year 2000 Minister for Information and Culture, I will take a little detour and tell you a little story. In 1991, when we went to cover the first Gulf War, this is when Saddam Hussein had gone and occupied Kuwait. At that time, we all bought these little instruction booklets that gave you insights about various countries, what to do, where to go, where to find accreditation, who are the top officials, etc., etc. So the Iran chapter there said that if you want to go to Ministry of Information, please, for heaven's sake, don't ask anybody to take you to Ministry of Information. Because Ministry of Information in Iraq is the Ministry of Intelligence. You may just go to the wrong guys and may not come out for some time. It's important, therefore, to understand that if you want to go to Ministry of Information, where you would get your accreditation, facilitation, etc., then ask for the Ministry of Religious Guidance. That was Iran, not Afghanistan. I'm just telling you the story on the side, so we understand that sometimes these titles can be confusing, can also be misleading. Now that done, 2021, when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, Pakistanis were celebrating. And they thought they had won a famous victory, and finally their dream, you can call it fantasy, I think it's a fantasy, their fantasy of having Afghanistan give them strategic depth had been achieved. They thought they had achieved it the first time. The Mujahideen, who they had looked after and patronized, they took over from Najibullah in the 91-93 period. That didn't happen. After that, they thought when the Taliban, who they had looked after over the Mujahideen in a way, they had taken over the first time in 1996, then they will get strategic depth. That did not happen. Now they thought with 2021, this was the final blow because they had defeated the Soviets and they had defeated the Americans, and they were the preeminent power in the region west of India, and the Afghans will also recognize it, particularly under the Taliban. And you might remember pictures, we'll show it to you on your screen, of the Pakistani ISI chief then, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, such as he is, standing there in a smart blazer, very smart blazer, with a teacup and saucer, and looked like he was celebrating victory. He, by the way, has ended up in jail. He's being court-martialed for multiple offenses, and chances are he might have to spend a lot of time in jail. Why? For the simple reason that Asim Munir doesn't like him. Asim Munir also is a former ISI chief, like Faiz Hamid. Now, India figured soon enough. Initially, there were many concerns in India. There was also some level of panic in the sense that India had already invested $3 billion, in fact, more than $3 billion in development projects in Afghanistan. So what will happen to all that investment? These include a water supply scheme, a dam, etc., etc. That's why in 2021 itself, India started informal contact with Taliban leadership, knowing fully well that this is the reality right now. And Taliban leadership is also very realistic about these things. How realistic they are to understand, I will give you an example from cricket, the Afghan cricket team. The Afghan cricket team still plays under their old flag, the old Afghan flag, not the Taliban's Afghan flag, the old Afghan flag, and also plays the same anthem, the old anthem, in all international matches. Afghan cricket team is very deeply rooted in India. It works out of India very often. Its home venue, when you play against another country bilaterally, you have away series and home series. Afghan cricket team uses India as its home ground, uses the old flag, as I said, uses the old anthem, and yet Taliban government celebrates all their achievements everywhere because they know how popular they are in their country. So the Taliban are very realistic people. They may be very ideological, they may be very doctrinaire when it comes to the faith. At the same time, when it comes to diplomacy, they show a great deal of sophistication. And that's the reason Mutaki is now in India. Now, India has not recognized the Taliban government yet, but India has moved closer. How has India done that? India had earlier reopened its embassy in Kabul without calling it an embassy. India called it a technical mission. So they could do some stuff here and there without having any trappings of an embassy or a diplomatic mission or a consulate. Now India has decided to upgrade it again to an embassy. Now it's a little complex. A country can have an embassy in another country as long as its ambassador's credentials will be accepted by the host country, doesn't have to recognize that country's government at the same time. If you look at the Chinese were the first to open their embassy in Taliban's Afghanistan, but they did not recognize the Taliban government. Russia became the first foreign government to recognize the Taliban government. Once again, if you try and fit the pieces, you will see China opening an embassy in Kabul, Russia recognizing the Taliban, and India now receiving the Taliban foreign minister and also upgrading its mission in Kabul to the full embassy level. I can take you back to Tianjin and those pictures of Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Narendra Modi together. So some people, I'm sure, in the US will see those pictures as they see Muttaqi's visit to India. Now, what is it that the Taliban hope to achieve through this outreach to India? So I will comment to you an article, a column by Dr. Swasti Rao, who's our consulting editor for international and strategic affairs. Please see that column, see the screenshot, and we'll share a link with you. She says they are after four things. One, they've realized that the stalled relationship with India is not in their interest. Because after all, what is their enmity with India? No Afghan regime has ever had enmity with India. I know that in India there is a little bit of a bad feeling about the Taliban from the IC-814 hijack episode, because that Indian Airlines plane was hijacked from Kathmandu, brought to Amritsar, taken to Dubai, UAE, and then taken to Kandahar. And that's where India took the prisoners that they had agreed to exchange with the airplane and its passengers and crew. That happened in Kandahar, and that was fully facilitated by then Taliban government. So India does carry a scar about that, but big countries and important countries who have larger stakes in life in future, they get over these. Besides that, India had no reason to have any tension with the Taliban, and that's what the Taliban also want to establish, that there should not be any hostility between their Afghanistan and India. It does not work. It does not work for them. It's not in their interest. Second, it is true that India has historically opposed the Taliban. So it's an opportunity for the Taliban to correct that, to rectify that. Number three, Donald Trump has been laying claims to Bagram Air Base. He's been wanting that air base. He's been even talking of buying it or renting it from the Taliban. Taliban have opposed it. They've said an absolute no. And very significantly, India issued a public statement supporting the Taliban position and saying that India opposes the idea of the Americans taking over the Bagram Air Base. Number four, of course, Mutaki would like India to give official recognition to Afghanistan and also bring in investments. Now, some of the investment talk took place because Jaishankar asked Mutaki that India should be allowed to make investments in Afghanistan's mining sector. Afghanistan is very mineral rich. The Chinese have already signed almost a $500 million deal with them to explore for oil in northern Afghanistan. But there are lots of other minerals. Also, the Chinese are bringing Afghanistan into the BRI project. India looks at Chabahar port. Okay, there are some sanctions issues now, but those things come and go. That is India's access to Afghanistan, and through Afghanistan also to all of mineral-rich Central Asia. So these are really high stakes. Now, I've told you, quoting from Swasti's article, what is it that the Taliban expect to achieve out of their engagement with India? She also tells us what are India's interests. So number one, it is to balance China and to make better use of Chabahar port. Number two, this is to reverse Pakistan's notion of strategic depth. In fact, this reverses the entire strategic depth question in the sense that Afghanistan becomes or is restored to being India's strategic depth, because it's a large landmass, a big country with a sizable population residing to the west of Pakistan. So for India to have excellent relations with Iran and even better active relations with Afghanistan, which has always been the case, is a very important thing. Also, if you look at the world, traditionally, India has found friendships in Russia, in Afghanistan, and in Iran. India has had positive relationships there, whereas there's been hostility and tension with China, Pakistan, and also Turkey. So there, Afghanistan sits in the middle. It's a very good balancing pivot. The fact is, or in fact, the great irony is that Pakistan keeps looking at Afghanistan as its backyard. As a backyard, the access to which it is entitled to. Pakistan is entitled to. Pakistan forgets all the time that Afghanistan also is a sovereign state and a very proud sovereign state. And for evidence, they have to look at their own history. The border between Afghanistan and Pakistan is a border that Afghans do not recognize. That is the Durand Line, drawn in 1893 by Sir Mortimer Durand, who was an Indian civil service officer. He was a civil servant and a diplomat. This line was drawn in 1893 and finally it was tweaked and codified or sort of set in stone between the two powers, the British imperial power and the Afghan power, in 1919 with the Anglo-Afghan Treaty. 1919, incidentally, was the year of the Jallianwala Bagh. That is just a coincidental fact, no connection there that I am mentioning. And the treaty between the British imperial government and the Amir of Afghanistan accepting the Durand Line is a one-page treaty, just one-page treaty with 7 clauses, 7 short clauses. This is when the British imperial power and the Afghans were having a series of wars, and finally the British, being the imperial power, they decided that instead of going into Afghanistan and ruling it, even when they were winning the wars, it was better to let the Afghans govern that very difficult and hostile territory where they'd lost a lot of people, far too many lives in their ambushes, so much that it inspired a lot of writing by Rudyard Kipling. They decided that they will keep control of Afghanistan's foreign policy and defense policy, whereas the rest, the Afghan ruler, the Amir of Afghanistan, could have. So the Amir of Afghanistan and Sir Mortimer Durand at that point in 1893, they drew a line on the map. And this is a line of 2,640 kilometers, starting with the border with China, coming right down, coming south up to the border with Iran. Then with Iran, Pakistan shares another border of 905 kilometers. Durand Line ends where Iran begins. Now this line was drawn on the map and the two sides said, either side, that is the British imperial administration of combined India then, and the Afghan ruler, they will not create any mischief or carry out any activity across the Durand Line. That's the line that Pakistan inherited when it became a country, and Pakistan has been treating that line as its border with Afghanistan. That is not something that any regime in Afghanistan has recognized, because they say this line has been drawn across families, across tribes, across villages. The same tribes, the same families, the same clans live on either side of this line. They have the right for free movement. In fact, the maximalist Afghan position is that all of the Pashtun territories in Pakistan, right up to the Indus River, which would mean almost all of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province now, is part of Afghanistan. So they don't accept this border. And it did not take long after the return of Taliban for tensions to develop along this line. The two countries had skirmishes, the two countries had skirmishes, they lined up heavy equipment on either side of the border. It's in this situation that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has been operating against Pakistani armed forces. Pakistan claims they are helped along by the Afghans, that they are based in Afghanistan. Pakistan, of course, also alleges that India is involved in this. But for all of these many reasons, Taliban become that much more important for India. So what's happened net is that instead of becoming Pakistan's strategic depth or a vassal state ever, Afghanistan under any regime has been fiercely protective of its sovereignty and has actually responded to every push from the Pakistan side with a ruder shove. That's what's going on right now. And you know, in geopolitics, even more than in life, your enemy's enemy is your friend.